What if I told you there's a commander that turns all of your lands into creatures, makes them basically impossible to interact with, and lets you sacrifice them over and over again without losing them in the process? Toph, Hardheaded Teacher. With the avatar set introducing Earthbending, I genuinely think we're looking at one of the most broken mechanics that Wizards has released in years. And this version of Toph is without question the commander that abuses that mechanic the hardest. For 4 mana in Gruul colors, we get a solid 3/4 body with 2 abilities. When Toph enters the battlefield, we get the option to discard a card to return any instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. Now, while this ability isn't a reason why we're playing her, it is actually very relevant. Being able to recur any interaction spell, ram spell, or even game finisher whenever we recast Toph from the command zone gives the deck a ton of resilience. And since we are playing a ton of land recursion in this deck, usually whenever you discard a land to this effect, it is actually a benefit to us. But the real reason Toph is such a powerhouse of a card is her second ability. Whenever you cast any spell, you get to Earthbend 1, meaning every spell we cast will turn one of our lands into a 0/0 land creature with haste, and it will get a +1/+1 counter. And while that already sounds really strong, that's not even the most broken part about Earthbending. The truly absurd thing about Earthbending is that whenever an Earthbend land would die or get exiled, it just returns to the battlefield tapped. And this means your opponents won't ever be able to deal with any of your lands once they're Earthbended. Destroying them won't work, exiling them won't work, and that single line of text really changes how lands function in this deck. Because now sacrificing our lands isn't a downside anymore, it's actually how we generate value in this deck. We'll constantly be Earthbending all of our lands thanks to Toph, sacrificing them to generate us value, fully knowing that they will just come back to the battlefield anyways. We'll be generating mana, landfall triggers, and a huge amount of value without ever losing any of our lands in the process. And Earthbending gets even more unhinged whenever you start adding some of the sacrifice lands into the mix. Take for example an Earthbent Fetchland. You can just crack it, it will go fetch you up a land, and then it will instantly come back to the battlefield tapped, and you will be able to use it again on a later turn. This will give you an absurd amount of acceleration and deck filtering, all for just playing a Fetchland like you normally would. This is easily one of the most complex decks I've ever done for the channel, but I really wanted to do at least one fully dedicated Earthbending list, because this mechanic really does operate on a level of its own, and Toph is just the perfect commander for it, because her ability allows us to keep Earthbending land after land, turn after turn, while most other Earthbend cards only allow you to Earthbend one single land. There are a ton of really unique interactions and synergies packed into this deck, and I'll try my best to explain all of them. But if I miss something, and trust me, I probably will, definitely let me know in the comments below. This deck also ended up with several different combo lines, so at the end of the video I do have a dedicated combos section. And I also took the time to write a really in-depth Moxfield primer that goes over every single combo in the deck, really explaining them in depth. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. And this video is divided up in 7 categories: the land sacrifice, the win conditions, the acceleration, the support cards, interaction and card draw, the lands, and in the end a dedicated combo section. Let's start off with the core mechanic that really makes this deck work: the land sacrifice. These are the cards that allow us to sacrifice our Earthbend lands for value, fully knowing they will just return to the battlefield anyways. This is where lands stop being just mana producing resources and they start being reusable value engines. Elvish Reclaimer, a simple 1-drop creature that will get +2/+2 for as long as there are 3 or more land cards in our graveyard. Now, getting a 3/4 body for just 1 mana is already a really solid deal, but it is all about his activated ability. For 2 mana and tapping this creature, we get to sacrifice a land we control and we get to tutor any land from our deck straight to the battlefield. And in a landfall deck, this effect is just absolutely bananas. We do play a huge amount of utility lands, and Elvish Reclaimer's ability just allows us to go fetch up any utility land we might need at the given board state. If you need a win condition, just go tutor up your Field of the Dead. If you need a haste enabler, go tutor up your Kavaron. If you want to set up one of the infinite combos in this deck, go tutor up your Shifting Woodland. Or if you do have Toph on the battlefield, just go tutor up any of your fetch lands to generate you some insane value. And obviously whenever you sacrifice an earthbent land to this effect, it will just come straight back to the battlefield tapped and you won't even lose it in the process. Orcish Lumberjack, a 1-mana creature that we can tap to sacrifice a forest. When we do, we get to add 3 mana to our mana pool in any combination of red and green. And this obviously is one of the best acceleration cards in this deck. You can just start earthbending your lands with Toph, sacrifice them to this creature's effect, generate a huge amount of mana, and the land will just return to the battlefield anyways. Essentially turning this card into a 1-drop creature that will just tap for 3 mana. And as you will see later in the video, sacrificing an earthbent land and actually making it return to the battlefield is actually a benefit to us, because we do play a ton of cards with the landfall mechanic and they will trigger every time an earthbent land returns. Skullclamp, a classic 1-mana artifact that every commander player knows. For 1 generic mana, you can equip this to any creature to give it +1 power and -1 toughness. And whenever the equipped creature would die, you get to draw 2 cards. So for 1 mana, you can equip Skullclamp to any of your earthbent lands, and since they are 1/1 creatures, they will just die. You will draw 2 cards in the process, and then the land just returns to the battlefield anyways. If you do have a Skullclamp and a couple of earthbent lands on the battlefield, the amount of cards you will be drawing will just be ridiculous. Sylvan Safekeeper, a 1-mana creature that allows us to sacrifice lands on instant speed to give any target creature Shroud until the end of turn. Shroud meaning that that creature can be the target of any spell or abilities. Now this card is an absolute staple in landfall decks, just due to the fact that we will always be controlling a gazillion lands and we will always have lands to sacrifice to protect Toph or any other valuable creature we have on the battlefield. Now aside from being a really solid protection piece, it is also the best sacrifice outlet in the entire deck, because it allows us to just sacrifice any of our lands on instant speed and we don't need any setup to make it happen, which when combined with the earthbending mechanic just allows us to sacrifice our lands, they will just re-enter and we will be able to generate a huge amount of landfall triggers. Crop Rotation, one of the game changer cards, and probably for good reason, because it's absolutely broken in any sort of landfall deck. For 1 mana on instant speed, you have to sacrifice any of your lands and you get to tutor your deck for any land and put it straight onto the battlefield. And like I already talked about with Elvish Reclaimer, the fact that you are able to tutor up any of your utility lands that you might need at a given board state is just bananas in a landfall deck. Just be warned, the sacrificing a land part is actually a part of the cost of Crop Rotation. So even whenever you do have Toph on the battlefield, whenever you cast this card, you will first have to sacrifice a land and then you will get your Toph trigger. So you can't earthbend a land first and then sacrifice it to this card's effect. Constant Mists. Whenever you cast this 2 mana instant speed spell, creatures won't be able to deal combat damage until the end of turn. So even though your opponents are swinging at you with like 10 million power on the board, you can just cast a spell and all damage will be prevented and your opponents won't be able to win the game. And this card also has the buyback mechanic, meaning whenever we cast it, we get the option to sacrifice a land as an additional cost. When we do, after this spell resolves, instead of putting it into our graveyard, it just returns to our hand instead. And thanks to Earthbending, this card sets up some sort of soft lock that makes sure your opponents will never ever be able to take you out of the game by using combat damage. If your opponents are swinging at you, just cast a spell, sacrifice a land, you will get an Earthbending trigger from Toph, all combat damage will be prevented, the spell will just return to your hand, and you can keep using it over and over again by just sacrificing the Earthbend lands and then Earthbending a new land. Evolutionary Leap. This 2 mana enchantment has an activated ability for 1 green mana and sacrificing a creature. When we do, we get to reveal the cards from the top of our library until we hit a creature card, and we get to put that card into our hand. A really solid sacrifice outlet to actually sacrifice our Earthbend lands to, that will allow us to dig really deep into our library and give us some sort of pseudo card advantage. Highway Robbery. For 2 mana, we get to either discard a card or sacrifice a land. When we do, we get to draw 2 cards. Just a nice little card that gives us an additional way to sacrifice any of our lands and turn it into actual card advantage. And this card also has the plot mechanic, meaning you can exile this card from your hand for 2 mana and then you can cast it for free on a later turn. Now the plotting part on this card might actually be really relevant in some situations, because if this card is in your hand and you don't have any Earthbend lands available to you, just invest the mana, exile it, and on a later turn whenever you do have some Earthbend lands available to you, just cast it for free and generate you that sweet card advantage. Nahiri's lithoforming. For 2 red mana plus X, you get to sacrifice X lands. For each land you sacrifice this way, you get to draw a card and you are allowed to drop an additional land this turn. A perfect card to use whenever you have like 3, 4, 5 Earthbend lands on the battlefield. Just sacrifice them to this card's effect. They will all re-enter the battlefield, give you a ton of landfall triggers. You will get to draw a ton of cards in the process. And if you draw into any lands, you will be able to get a huge amount of extra land drops this turn, giving you even more landfall triggers and accelerating your mana by a huge amount. I really like to view this card as some sort of a budget version of Scapeshift. And don't you worry, I will be talking about Scapeshift later in this section. Cycle of Renewal. For 3 mana on instant speed, we get to sacrifice a land. When we do, we get to search our library for 2 basic land cards and put them on the battlefield tapped. And unlike crop rotation and constant mists, the sacrificing a land part isn't actually an additional cost. So whenever you have Toph on the battlefield, you can just cast this card. Before it resolves, you will get an Earthbend trigger, and then you can sacrifice that Earthbend land to this card's effect, which will give you 2 additional lands entering the battlefield, accelerating your mana like crazy, and it will give you a total of 3 landfall triggers. Evendo Brush Razor. Whenever we sacrifice any non-token permanent, we get to exile the top card of our library. And during our turn, if we did sacrifice a permanent with this creature on the battlefield, we are allowed to play any of those exiled cards by this effect. And this effect will trigger from any sacrifice source we play in the deck, and as you've already seen in the video, we do play a lot of those. It will trigger off your Fetchlands, it will trigger off crop rotation, Elvish Reclaimer will trigger this effect, and whenever you cast a Nahiri's lithoforming, you will get a huge amount of triggers of this effect, which will allow you to dig really deep into your library and give you a huge amount of pseudo card advantage. And by tapping this creature and sacrificing a land, you get to add 2 red mana to your mana pool, functioning in the same way as an Orcish Lumberjack, giving you an additional sacrifice outlet and giving you a really solid way to trigger its own ability. Evolving Door, a 3 mana sacrifice outlet that has a really similar ability to Birthing Pot. For 1 mana and tapping this artifact, we get to sacrifice a creature. Then we get to search our library for any creature that has the amount of colors of the sacrificed creature plus 1. And then we are allowed to cast the creature we just picked. Now obviously we will be sacrificing our Earthbend lands to this card's effect, and lands are actually colorless creatures. So when we do, we get to search our library for any mono-colored creature, either a mono green creature or a mono red creature. Now honestly, most of the creatures in this deck are monocolored anyways, and it will just give you a huge pool of utility creatures to choose from. Just be warned, you do actually have to pay the mana cost to cast a creature. You don't get to put it onto the battlefield for free, and you will only get 1 window to actually cast the chosen card, and that is whenever this ability resolves. If you don't cast it, you will lose it in exile forever. Aggressive Mining, a 4 mana enchantment that won't allow you to play lands anymore. And by sacrificing a land, you get to draw 2 cards, but you can only activate this ability once per turn. Now I know, playing an enchantment that doesn't allow us to play any more lands in a landfall deck might seem really controversial, but hear me out. Obviously you don't want to be dropping this card onto the battlefield if you only control like 3 to 4 lands, because you will just lock yourself out of the game that way. But the amount of value that this card will generate you later in the game can be absolutely absurd. Once you do have an established board state and you have like 7, 8, 9, 10 lands onto the battlefield and you are able to Earthbend them, you can just start sacrificing your Earthbend lands, draw a huge amount of cards of the aggressive mining, and you won't even be losing your lands in the process. And because this card's ability can be activated on instant speed, you can actually use it in every player's turn, allowing you to draw 8 cards per turn cycle, which is absolutely crazy. Scapeshift. Yeah, what should I even say about this one? It's probably the most broken landfall card ever printed, until they finally decide to unban Primeval Titan, that is. For 4 mana, you get to sacrifice any number of your lands, and then you get to search your library for that many land cards and put them straight onto the battlefield tapped. And the things that Scapeshift can do are absolutely insane. Later in the game, if you for example control 7 non-utility lands, just mana producing lands, you can just sacrifice them, go tutor up 7 utility lands you need, they will enter the battlefield instantly and you will get all of their ETB effects. A really classic example is just using a Scapeshift, going to fetch up a Field of the Dead and 6 other lands. Field of the Dead will see all of those lands entering the battlefield and you will instantly be able to generate 7 zombie tokens. Now, while Scapeshift is an absolutely broken card in any sort of landfall deck, it does go absolutely nuclear when you combine it with Earthbending. Let's say you control 4 Earthbend lands, you can just cast your Scapeshift, the lands will be sacrificed, returned to the battlefield instantly, and you will get 4 more lands from your deck, allowing you to just accelerate your mana by getting 4 additional lands onto the battlefield, and you will get a total of 8 landfall triggers. And that's just giving an example. By sacrificing 4 lands, you can do so much more in this deck. And the last card in this section is Famished Worldsire, a massive 8 mana creature with the Devour Land tree mechanic, meaning whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to sacrifice any of our lands. Then for each land we did sacrifice, this creature will enter the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters. And whenever it does enter the battlefield, we get to look at the top X cards of our library, X being this creature's power. And we are allowed to put any number of land cards revealed this way straight onto the battlefield tapped. Now, while I did mention that Nahiri's lithoforming is some sort of a budget Scapeshift, this is the more expensive 8 mana version of Scapeshift, and the amount of lands you can get from this effect is absolutely crazy. You can just play this card, sacrifice 5 Earthbend lands, they will return to the battlefield anyways. You get to look at the top 15 cards of your deck, and any number of land cards in those 15 cards will go straight onto the battlefield. And since we do play a total of 41 land cards in this deck, you will always have a huge amount of targets. Now, I'm gonna be honest, due to costing 8 mana, this card might not be the most efficient card in the deck. But I mean, just look at the art and how cool and unique his ability is. I just had to include this card in the deck. Next up, we have the win conditions. Now, while Earthbending will give us a huge amount of landfall triggers, those won't win the game on their own. This section covers all of the cards that turns our land looping into an actual game win, whether it is through non-combat damage, generating us a huge amount of tokens, or any other payoffs that scale with the huge amount of landfall triggers we generate. Springheart Nantuko, a 2 mana creature with the bestow mechanic, meaning by paying 2 mana we can actually play this card as an enchant creature card. The enchanted creature will get +1/+1 and Springheart Nantuko's ability. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control, be it thanks to Earthbending, a huge Scapeshift, or just dropping lands from our hand, we get the ability to pay 2 mana. When we do, we get to create a token copy of whatever creature that Springheart Nantuko is attached to. And if we didn't pay this additional cost, we just get to create a 1/1 insect token. Now, we can use Springheart Nantuko's ability in a huge amount of ways in this deck. You can just have it on the battlefield, and whenever any land enters, it will generate you a small army of those 1/1 tokens. You can attach it to any non-legendary win-con creature we play in this deck to just generate you a huge amount of value and take over the game. And thanks to Earthbending, our lands will actually turn into creatures and you can actually bestow a Springheart Nantuko on them. Just imagine Earthbending a Field of the Dead, bestowing a Springheart Nantuko onto it, and whenever you then loop any of your lands, you can just pay 2 mana to get even more Field of the Deads onto the battlefield. And since Field of the Dead isn't a legendary land, you will just generate a gazillion zombie tokens and you will instantly win the game. And whenever you do decide to create a copy out of any Earthbend land with Springheart Nantuko's ability, the token that enters is actually also a land token and it will give you another landfall trigger, enabling you to pay the mana cost again and create another copy. Skewed Swarm. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to generate a 1/1 insect token. But whenever this ability triggers and we do control 6 or more lands, we get to create a copy out of Skewed Swarm instead. And if you didn't know about Skewed Swarm already, I'm about to blow your mind, because this little 3-drop creature can take over games all by itself. Let's say you do have 6 lands on the battlefield and you have a Skewed Swarm. If you're then able to drop a land, you will get a second Skewed Swarm. If you then sacrifice one of your Earthbend lands, both copies will trigger and you will get 4 Skewed Swarms. On the next landfall, you will get 8 Skewed Swarms. Then you will get 16, 32, 64, 128. Yeah, you can do the math. If your opponents aren't able to remove Skewed Swarm on the turn it comes down, they will never ever be able to deal with it anymore, because it will just get out of control. Tenuk, Memorial Ensign. Another really solid Gruul landfall commander that I already did a video about. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Tenuk will deal 1 damage to each opponent. And whenever this ability triggers for the second time in a single turn, we also get to draw a card. And Tenuk basically gives us a win con for just doing what we are planning to do anyways. Cycling our lands and getting a huge amount of landfall triggers. Just imagine casting Escape Shift on 5 of your Earthbend lands. The 5 lands will leave, they will enter again, you will get to put another 5 lands onto the battlefield, and Tenuk will deal a total of 10 damage to every single one of your opponents. And usually when Tenuk just sits on the battlefield for like 2 or 3 turns, he will deal 40 damage to all of your opponents, because we will be looping this many lands. And the fact that you get to draw a card for just getting simple 2 landfall triggers in any given turn makes it into a really solid draw engine. Ballot Prime, a massive 4 mana 10/10 creature body. To balance this massive stat line out, it will enter the battlefield tapped with 6 stun counters onto it. So you first need to get 6 untaps on this creature before you can actually start swinging with it. Whenever we sacrifice a land to any effect, we get to create a tapped 4/4 beast token and we get to untap this creature. And as you've already seen, we do run a ton of ways to sacrifice our lands in this deck. It will trigger off Fetchlands, of cards like Elvish Reclaimer, and you will get a huge amount of triggers if you cast Escape Shift. And you will be generating a small army of 4/4 beast tokens that you can use to take your opponents out of the game with. And on top of that, this creature also is a sacrifice outlet himself. For 4 generic mana and sacrificing a land, you get to gain 4 life, giving us an additional way to just start tossing our Earthbend lands into the graveyard and start generating those 4/4 beast tokens. Titania, Protector of Orgoth. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to pick any land card in our graveyard and just return it to the battlefield. A fantastic way to recur any of your fetch lands in your graveyard, any land cards you might have milled, or any land cards you might have discarded to Toph's first ability. And whenever any land is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, we get to generate a 5/3 green elemental token. And this effect is really easy to trigger in this deck. You can just crack any of your fetch lands, use cards like Escape Shift, or sacrifice any of your Earthbend lands, because they do actually hit the graveyard before they return to the battlefield. And when you do, you will get to generate a huge amount of these really aggressively statted 5-power creature tokens. And you will only need a couple of those to actually threaten lethal on your opponents. Avenger of Zendikar, a really classic landfall staple card, and despite its low price tag, it is still a very potent card. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to generate a 0/1 plant token for each land we control. Now usually whenever you drop this creature, you will be controlling between 5 to 10 lands, so you will generate a huge amount of these plant tokens. And whenever a land does enter the battlefield, you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So you can just drop your Avenger, generate you a battalion of these plant tokens, then you can start looping your lands, and suddenly those little cute 0/1 plant tokens will now be like 7, 8, 9 power creatures. Omnath, Locus of Rage. This is the token generator in the deck that will actually produce us the biggest tokens. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to generate a massive 5/5 elemental token. And all of the token generators we play in this deck have one thing in common. They will enable us to go from an essentially empty board state to a board filled with huge creature tokens really quickly. Just have an Omnath on the battlefield, usually thanks to the Earthbending and all of the effects we play in this deck, you will be able to get like 5 to 10 landfall triggers in any given turn, and your board state will just essentially explode. On top of that, Omnath also has some built-in protection against board wipes, because whenever Omnath or any other elemental model we control would die, we get to deal 3 damage to any target. So let's say you have Omnat and 10 elemental tokens on the battlefield. Someone decides to cast a board wipe. Omnat will actually see all of the elemental creature tokens dying, and you will be able to ping 33 damage to any target, which usually is enough to just take a player out of the game on the spot. Craterhoof Behemoth, a massive 8 mana 5/5 creature with haste. And whenever Craterhoof Behemoth enters the battlefield, all creatures you control will gain trample and +X/+X, X being the total amount of creatures you control. Now, as you've just seen, we are playing a ton of token generating cards in this deck, be it a Field of the Dead, an Avenger of Zendikar, a Ballot Prime, and Craterhoof allows us to give a massive stat boost to those creatures, and usually a Craterhoof will just win you the game whenever you resolve it with a couple of tokens on the field. And the best part about it is the fact that it does give trample to all your creatures, because if you're playing against a token player, for example, that controls like 20 1/1 goblins to chump block your creatures, you can't actually close out the game. And the trample really solves that problem. As you will see later in the video, we do also play a couple of creature tutors in the deck, and Craterhoof is one of the best targets if you do need a win con. And now that we're talking about creature tutors, there's actually one creature tutor in the win con section, being Finale of Devastation. For 2 green mana +X, we get to search either our library or our graveyard for a creature with mana value X or less. Then we get to put that creature straight onto the battlefield. Now, first and foremost, the fact that this tutor also allows us to search our graveyard for any creature makes it into a fantastic recursion piece. If someone mills one of your win cons later in the game, you actually have the option to get it back with this card. And creature tutors are just fantastic in this type of deck because we do play some sort of a toolbox deck. Tutors will enable us to go fetch up any utility creature we might need at the given board state. Be it a Craterhoof Behemoth to just close out the game with, an Omnat to start generating us tokens, a Sylvan Safekeeper to start setting up our combo lines, or even a Famished Worldsire if you just want to flex on your friends. Now, the reason why this tutor card is in the win condition section is if you actually spend 10 or more mana to the X cost of the spell, all creatures you control will get +X/+X and they will get haste, instantly enabling you to give a huge stat boost similar to Craterhoof Behemoth to all your creatures, and thanks to the haste you will instantly be able to swing with them. A fantastic card to just catch your opponents off guard with. Next up, we have the acceleration section. Toph wants to come down as early as possible, and when she is on the battlefield, we do want enough mana available to start chaining spells and start earthbending. We play a total of 10 cards that will enable us to cast Toph as early as turn 3, and they will give us all the raw mana we need to keep the engine running once the deck is online. Sol Ring, probably the best acceleration card ever printed. For 1 mana, you get an artifact you can tap to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. And thanks to Toph having 2 generic mana in her mana cost, we will be able to get Toph out as early as turn 2. And I can guarantee you, whenever this happens, you are going to have a really good time. Badger Mole Cup. By far the most broken card we got in the entire Avatar set. For 2 mana, you get a creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows you to earthbend 1, already giving you an additional earthbend trigger before Toph even comes down, and whenever you tap any of your creatures for mana, you get to add an additional green mana to your mana pool. And this effect is basically made for earthbending, because whenever you tap any of your earthbend lands, which are creatures, they will now produce you 2 mana. So you can just drop this on turn 2, earthbend one of your lands, and on turn 3 you will already have 4 mana available to cast Toph. And later in the game, if you do control like 5 earthbend lands, you will be able to tap them for double the mana. Although this card is currently sitting at a €40 price tag, it is totally worth it for this deck. Edge of Autumn. For 2 mana, you get to put a basic land card from your deck straight onto the battlefield tapped. But you can only use this effect if you control 4 or fewer lands. Now later in the game, if you do control more lands, no fear, you can still use this card's cycling ability. By sacrificing a land, you can discard this card to draw a new card, both acting as an acceleration spell, a sacrifice outlet for any of your earthbend lands, and it will just replace itself when you do so. Explore. 2 mana, draw a card, and you are allowed to play an additional land this turn. Another way to get Toph out on turn 3, get an additional landfall trigger, and it will just replace itself. Nature's Lore and Tree Visits. Both spells have different names, but they have exactly the same effect, so you can play both in the deck. You get to search your library for any sort of forest card and put it on the battlefield. It doesn't even enter tapped. And it don't have to be basic lands either. You can use these cards to go search up any land with the forest typing, like a survey land, a shock land, whatever. We also play 3 other 2 mana spells that will allow us to go fetch a land from our deck and put it onto the battlefield tapped, being a Farseek, an Into the North, and a Shared Roots. These cards aren't anything fancy, and the only reason they are included in the deck is because we just want to get Toph out as early as turn 3. And you do want to take really aggressive mulligans to actually ensure that you have a ramp piece in your opening hand so you can make that happen. And even later in the game, if you do draw into these cards, it isn't all that horrible, because they will give you an Earthbending trigger thanks to Toph, accelerate your mana by grabbing you a land, and they will give you a landfall trigger. Lotus Cobra, a 2 mana landfall creature that will generate you 1 mana of any color whenever a land enters the battlefield. And as you can imagine, with all the land cycling we are going to be doing in this deck, it will generate you an absurd amount of mana. Whenever you play a fetch land, it will generate you 1 mana, and whenever you then crack that fetch land, it will generate you another mana, giving you an insane amount of value from fetch lands. Play Escape Shift with this creature on the battlefield and it will produce you like 5 to 10 mana. And whenever you sacrifice any of your Earthbend lands, you will get to generate 1 mana in the process. Absolute must-have card in any sort of landfall deck, especially at the low cost of 2 mana. Nissa, Resurgent Animist. For 3 mana you get a card with exactly the same effect as a Lotus Cobra. Whenever a land enters, you get to generate 1 mana of any color. But if this ability triggers for the second time in a single turn, you get an additional effect. You get to reveal the top cards of your library until you hit an elf or an elemental card, and you get to put that card into your hand. And we do play a ton of really relevant elves and elementals in this deck. The elves being an Elvish Reclaimer, an Aftermath Analyst, a Disciple of Freelize, and a Tireless Provisioner. And for the elementals we can hit an Avenger of Zendikar, an Omnath, a Shaya, or a Titania. So on top of functioning as a second copy of Lotus Cobra in this deck, Nissa will also fetch up our best creatures from the deck straight to our hand. And the last card in this section is Tireless Provisioner. For 3 mana you get an elf creature that on landfall will produce you either a treasure token or a food token. The treasure tokens being an excellent way to just accelerate your mana, making this card function in the same way as a Nissa or a Lotus Cobra. And all 3 of the previous cards I mentioned that do generate mana on landfall are used in a ton of our infinite combos in the deck. If you're enjoying these in-depth Commander deck videos and you want to support me and the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. Members will get early access to all of the deck lists before the videos even go live. You will get some custom Panzer MTG emojis you can use anywhere on YouTube or Discord, and you will get access to member exclusive channels in the Discord server where I'm always sharing what future projects I'm currently working on. And speaking of the Discord, if you're not in there yet, you're really missing out. We just launched something new that I'm really excited about, the Panzer MTG Deck Archive. It's a dedicated forum within the Discord server where you can post your deck list, and it will stay up there forever. It won't get buried in the chat and it won't disappear after a week. Other people will be able to check it out, get some inspiration for it, or they can even give you feedback on it. If you want to support the channel or join the Discord server, both links are in the description below. And as always, a huge thanks to all the current YouTube members. Thanks to you, I can keep doing what I am most passionate about: create some really strong and unique Commander decks. Next up, we have the support section. These are the cards that didn't fit into any other category, but they do improve everything we're trying to do in this deck. Give us double the landfall triggers, make all of our lands enter the battlefield untapped, give us extra value whenever we sacrifice our lands, and some unique effects that really improve the explosiveness of this deck. Amulet of Vigor, a simple 1 mana artifact that whenever any permanent would enter the battlefield under our control tapped, will untap it. Now this might seem like a really simple effect, but it is actually one of the most impactful cards in the entire deck. Any of your tap lands will now enter the battlefield untapped and you will instantly be able to use them for mana. Whenever you do sacrifice an Earthbend land, it will now return to the battlefield untapped and you will instantly be able to use it again. It does have some really insane synergies with both Toph and Fetchlands. If you do have the ability to Earthbend multiple times in a single turn, you can have one simple fetchland fetching you up 5 lands from your deck in a single turn, which is absolutely crazy. And it even synergizes really well with cards like Ballot Prime, because the tokens it generates will now also enter the battlefield untapped. Green Sun Zenith. For 1 green mana plus X, we get to search our library for any green creature card with mana value X or less, and we get to put it straight onto the battlefield. After this spell resolves, we also get to reshuffle it into our library. Now, as I mentioned before, we are some sort of a toolbox deck, and we do play a ton of really good utility creatures. And tutors just allow us to go fetch up the utility creature we need at the given board state. And we also play one really nifty interaction with Green Sun Zenith, and that is Dryad Arbor. Dryad Arbor being a 1/1 land creature that actually has a mana cost of 0 mana. Meaning as early as turn 1 you can just cast your Green Sun Zenith with X being 0, go fetch up your Dryad Arbor, and you will be able to accelerate your mana from as early as turn 1. Aftermath Analyst. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, we get to mill 3 cards. Now, we're not a graveyard deck by any means, but getting lands into our graveyard is actually pretty beneficial to us, especially thanks to this card's activated ability. For 4 mana and sacrificing this creature, we get to return all land cards from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped, acting in exactly the same way as a Splendid Reclamation. And the amount of value that this simple 2-drop creature will be able to generate you is absolutely mental. You can discard land cards to Toph's effect, you will be sacrificing your Fetchlands, or you will be milling lands thanks to this card's own ability. For the low cost of 4 mana, you will be able to instantly get all of those lands back, accelerating your mana by a huge amount and giving you a huge amount of landfall triggers. Horned Kavu, a 2 mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield forces us to return either a green or a red creature to our hand. Now, why is this card included in the deck? And the reason is honestly very simple. Whenever you do have Toph on the battlefield, you can just play this card and get an Earthbend trigger because you just cast a spell, bounce it back to your hand, and you will be able to cast it again for 2 mana, just over and over again. Just giving you a way to keep Earthbending over and over again and actually get all of your lands Earthbent. Nature's Rhythm. For 2 green mana plus X, we get to search our library for any creature card with mana value X or less and put it onto the battlefield. On top of that, this card also has the Harmonize mechanic, meaning whenever it is in our graveyard, we can pay 4 green mana plus X to just recast it. And whenever you do cast this card using its Harmonize mechanic, you can actually tap any creature you control and the cost of this spell will be reduced by that creature's power. Now, usually we will have Toph on the battlefield and we won't actually ever be swinging with her, so you can just use Toph to tap and reduce the cost of this card by 3 mana. The main reason I am such a big fan of Nature's Rhythm as a tutor is the fact that it's one card that will give you 2 uses. Also a really good card to discard to Toph's first ability because you will just be able to cast it from your graveyard on a later turn anyways. Horizon Explorer, a 3 mana creature that is basically Amulet of Vigor on a stick, because for as long as this creature is on the battlefield, all your lands will enter the battlefield untapped. And I already explained how strong this type of effect is when I was talking about the Amulet of Vigor. Perfect with tap lands, perfect with Earthbending, and enables a ton of combos in this deck. And whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we also get to create a lander token, which functions in exactly the same way as any of the 2 mana acceleration spells in this deck. We can sacrifice a lander token for 2 mana to just go fetch up any basic land in the deck and put it into the battlefield tapped. And thanks to this card's first effect, it will actually enter the battlefield untapped. Spelunking, another 3 mana enchantment that has exactly the same effect as Amulet of Vigor, making our lands enter the battlefield untapped. And on top of that, whenever this enchantment enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card and we are allowed to put a land card from our hand straight onto the battlefield. So whenever we play it, it will already replace itself and give us an additional land drop and an additional landfall trigger. Traveling Chocobo. This 3 mana creature will allow us to look at the top card of our library at any given time. And we are allowed to play any land card straight from the top of our deck, essentially giving us some really solid card advantage by giving us 1 extra card in our hand, being the top card of our library if it is a land card. Now honestly, that kind of effect is already pretty neat, but its second ability is where this card gets absolutely crazy. If a land entering the battlefield would trigger any ability of any permanent we control, it will trigger an additional time, essentially doubling up on all the landfall triggers we already have in this deck. You will get double the amount of tokens of Omnat, Avenger of Zendikar and the Ballot Prime, Tannock will now deal 2 damage whenever a land enters the battlefield. You will get double the amount of triggers of your skewed swarm, and you will get double the amount of zombies of your Field of the Dead. Traveling Chocobo really feels like a power-crept version of an Oracle of Multaya of something. This card is just an auto-inclusion in any sort of landfall deck. And now that we're talking about absolute landfall power creep, I Still Explorer. This 4-drop creature is basically a combination of a Crucible of Worlds and an Exploration on one single card. Whenever it is on the battlefield, you are allowed to play an additional land drop every single one of your turns, and it also allows you to play lands from your graveyard, which is just an excellent way to replay any of your Fetchlands or any of the non-Earthbend lands you sacrifice this game. And it doesn't even stop there, because on top of all of those already really great abilities, this card also has its own landfall ability. Whenever a land we control enters, we have to mill a card, which obviously is just a fantastic thing because this card will allow us to play lands from our graveyard. I know I probably mentioned this a couple of times throughout the video, but this is just an absolutely insane landfall card. The amount of support that landfall has been getting in the most recent Magic sets is absolutely insane, and landfall is really turning into one of the strongest archetypes in the entirety of Magic. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. Guys, listen, I found a way to break Ashaya. Now honestly, I don't really like including Ashaya in any of my decks, because it has an ability that breaks all the rules of how lands are supposed to work. And the ability is really simple. All non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. Alright, so first and foremost, this will turn all of your creatures into forests, so you will actually be able to tap all of your creatures to add green mana to your mana pool. Already giving you some really solid acceleration, but honestly that's not even the reason why Ashaya is included. This effect actually gets really complex with Earthbending, because now you will be able to Earthbend your creatures. I will just point out a couple of things you can do with Ashaya. If I did miss some interactions, you can always let me know in the comments below. Whenever you now cast a spell with Toph on the battlefield, you will actually be able to Earthbend your creatures, meaning that your opponents won't have any way to destroy or exile your creatures anymore. They will just return to the battlefield tapped whenever they do so. Even if your opponents cast a Farewell in this situation, which is like the end-all be-all board wipe, it won't even work on your board. Whenever you now play any of your creatures, cards like Lotus Cobra and Nissa will trigger and generate you mana, because it does count as a land entering the battlefield. You can do some really funky stuff with Springheart, Nantuko and Ashaya, because every copy you make of any creature will now also be a land. Pinnacle Monk, a 5 mana MDFC creature card. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to return target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand, allowing us to get an extra use out of our tutors, any of our interaction spells, or any of our acceleration spells. And if you don't need the front side of this card, you can just play the backside, which is a land that taps for red mana and will even enter the battlefield untapped for the low cost of 3 life. And there is a really funny trick you can do with these type of MDFC creatures. Whenever you do have this card on the battlefield as a land with its backside up and you do manage to Earthbend it, whenever it then leaves the battlefield, it will always return with its front side up as a creature, actually giving you a 5 mana creature with a really strong ETB effect for absolutely free. Pretty nifty trick that makes Earthbending even better. And the last card in this section is Walking Closet and Forgotten Cellar, one of the Duskmourn room cards, meaning whenever this card is in your hand, you can cast either the left side or the right side. It will enter the battlefield with the side you did decide to cast, and the other side will be locked. And you will be able to unlock it by just paying the mana cost, actually getting both of this card's effects. The left side of this card is essentially a Crucible of Worlds, allowing you to replay lands from your graveyard, which as you've seen by now is really good in this deck because we do play a couple of self-mill effects. And whenever you do unlock the right side of this card, you will get what is essentially a free Yawgmoth's Will. Until the end of turn, you can cast any spells from your graveyard, which is an absolutely insane thing to do later in the game. But do keep in mind, if a card would be put in your graveyard this turn, it will be exiled instead. So if you have this effect active, you don't actually want to be sacrificing any of your Earthbend lands, because they will hit the graveyard first and then they will be exiled by this effect and they won't actually be returning. Next up, we have the interaction and the card draw section. While this deck can do some absolutely wild things, we do have to make sure that we can actually survive to get to that point at a multiplayer table. The cards in this section allow allow us to interact with any cards that our opponents might be playing, protect our own value pieces, and that will keep our hand filled throughout the game so we never run out of gas. Insidious Fungus, a simple 1-drop creature with an activated ability for 2 generic mana and sacrificing it. When we do, we get to pick 1 out of 3 options. We can use it to destroy target artifact, target enchantment, or we can sort of use it as a cantrip by drawing us a card and enabling us to drop an additional land this turn. One of the most versatile 1-drop creatures in existence. Stocking the Pantry. Whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on any permanent you control, you get to put a supply counter on this enchantment. And for 2 generic mana and removing a supply counter from this card, we get to draw a card. Now, as you can imagine, with the huge amount of Earthbending that we will be doing in this deck, we will be able to stack a huge amount of counters on this card. And later in the game, if we do control like 10 gazillion lands, we can just start investing mana into this enchantment and actually draw a huge amount of cards of it. Collective Resistance, a 2 mana instant speed spell with 3 fantastic options. Once again, allows us to destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or it will give a creature hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. A really good way to deal with any problematic cards your opponents might have on the battlefield, and it also functions as a really good defensive spell to either protect Toph or any of your other value creatures in the deck. And on top of that, this card also has the Escalate mechanic, meaning whenever we cast it, we can pay 1 additional green mana any amount of times, and per additional green mana we paid, we get to pick an additional option. So you can either cast it for 2, just pick 1 of the options, or you can cast it for 4 mana and actually pick all of the options, which is just some insane value. Really one of the most versatile mono green interaction cards. Heroic Intervention. For 2 mana on instant speed, you get to give all permanents you control hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. And this card does read permanent, so it will even give all of your lands these effects. Now, thanks to Earthbending, our lands will already be really hard to deal with for our opponents. But there is one thing they can actually do to mess with our lands. That is using any sort of mass bounce spell, like a Cyclonic Rift, for example. If you know your opponents are about to cast a Cyclonic Rift, just keep 2 mana open. When they do, just activate your Heroic Intervention. All your lands will be hexproof, your opponents won't be able to target them, and your lands will just be fine. Otherwise, you will just be set back into the Stone Age and you won't actually control any lands anymore. Lightning Greaves. For 2 mana, you get an equipment that will give the equipped creature Shroud and Haste. A great card to put onto Toph or any of your other value engines so they can be targeted with spot removal. And since this card has an equip cost of 0 mana, you can use it as a great haste enabler. Origin of Metal Bending. And you could have guessed it, another 2 mana card that allows us to destroy either an artifact or an enchantment, or that we can use to give Toph indestructible until the end of the turn to protect her from board wipes or spot removal. Sylvan Library, the best card draw engine that mono green has access to. For 2 mana, you get an enchantment that at the beginning of your draw step will allow you to draw 2 additional cards. Then you get the option to keep those cards in your hand at the cost of 4 life per card. This card essentially reads draw 3 cards per turn and lose 8 life. And since we start a game of Commander with 40 life, we do have a ton of resource to work with. Life is a resource anyways, people. Use it. Melstrider Eulogist. Whenever a creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it would die, we get to draw a card. And this thing gets absolutely crazy with Earthbending, because all of the Earthbent lands will actually be creatures with +1/+1 counters on them. So now whenever we start looping through our lands and sacrificing them, every time we do so, we will get to draw 1 additional card of that. If this card does stick to the battlefield for a couple of turns, you will be able to draw like 10 to 20 cards of it. The value is really insane. Spinner of Souls, a 3 mana creature that has a really similar effect to Evolutionary Leap. Whenever a non-token creature we control would die, we get to flip the top cards of our library until we hit a creature card and we get to put it into our hand. So whenever we now are cycling through our Earthbent lands, every time we do so, we will get to dig 1 creature deeper into our library, giving us an excellent form of pseudo card draw. Valakut Exploration, a 3 mana enchantment with the landfall mechanic. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, we get to exile the top card of our library, and we are allowed to play that card until the end of our turn. With the amount of landfall triggers we will be generating in this deck, it is a really fantastic enchantment that will allow us to dig really deep into our library. At the beginning of our end step, every card exiled by this enchantment will be put in our graveyard, and then this enchantment will deal damage to each opponent for each card we put in our graveyard this way, which is actually a really nice thing because the cards will just go to our graveyard and they won't be stuck in exile. So we are able to use any of our recursion tools to just get them back. And whenever you are able to get like 10 to 20 landfall triggers in a single turn, this enchantment might actually act as a win con for the deck. Disciple of Realize, a 6 mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows us to sacrifice any other creature we control. Then we get to gain X life and draw X cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power. Now, as you can imagine, this is just a fantastic way to draw a ton of cards. You can sacrifice one of your Omnath tokens to draw 5, you can sacrifice your Ballot Prime to draw 10 cards, or you can use it as a sacrifice outlet to just sacrifice any of your Earthbend lands to get additional landfall triggers. If you don't need the front side of this card, just play the backside, which is a land that taps for green mana and even enters untapped for the low cost of 3 life. Like I explained when I was talking about Pinnacle Monk, if you do have this card on the battlefield backside up as a land and you do manage to Earthbend it, then you sacrifice it, it will return front side up, which is a thing you can really easily make happen in this deck, and it will generate you an insane amount of value. And the last card in this section is a Blasphemous Act, a massive 9 mana sorcery speed spell that will deal 13 damage to each creature on the battlefield. And its cost is reduced by 1 generic mana for each creature that actually is on the battlefield, which is just perfect because the only time you will need a board wipe like this is whenever the board is filled with creatures. And this card functions as some sort of a panic button. If your opponents are ahead on the board and they're actually threatening lethal on you, you can just destroy everything. Your Earthbend lands will also get removed in the process, but they will just return anyways. And you will even get a huge amount of landfall triggers of this effect. And finally, the section that everyone has been waiting for, the lands. Now, since this is a land focused deck, the mana base isn't just there to produce us mana. It is actually the most important part of the entire engine. These are lands with some really powerful abilities on their own, or they get absolutely crazy whenever you start earthbending them. Ally Encampment, a land that will tap for a colorless mana or 1 mana of any color, but we can only use the colored mana to cast an ally spell, which is just perfect because Toph has the ally creature typing. And for 1 mana, tapping and sacrificing this land, we get to return target ally we control to our hand. A perfect little land that we can use to protect Toph whenever someone is aiming a spot removal spell or a board wipe at her. And obviously, if you do manage to earthbend this land, sacrificing it won't even matter because it will just return to the battlefield anyways. Ba Sing Se enters untapped if we do control a basic land, and for 3 mana and tapping it, we get to earthbend 2, giving us an additional way on one of our lands to actually get those earthbend triggers. Boseiju Who Endures, a legendary land that doesn't even enter the battlefield tapped and will just tap for a green mana. And this card also has the channel ability, and a really good one at that, and that's probably why it's such an expensive card. For 2 mana and discarding this land, we get to destroy any target non-basic land, artifact or enchantment. The controller of that permanent will get to search their library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped. And the cost of this ability is reduced by 1 generic mana for each legendary creature we control. And since we will always be controlling Toph, you will be always able to use this for 1 green mana, giving you a solid way to deal with anything on the battlefield. And since channel is an activated ability, your opponents won't actually be able to use any counter magic to stop this from happening. Crumbling Vestige. Even though this land enters the battlefield tapped, it will still produce you mana on the turn you play it, because whenever it enters, it will generate you 1 mana of any color. This really simple land really opens up a ton of really unique plays you can make with earthbending. Cryptic Caves. For 1 mana, tapping and sacrificing this land, you get to draw a card, but you can only activate this ability if you control 5 or more lands. Later in the game, this land just gives you a recurable draw option, because you can just earthbend a land, sacrifice it, draw a card, earthbend it again, sacrifice it again, and you will be able to draw a huge amount of cards of this effect, especially if you do have any untap effect on the battlefield, because it won't even enter the battlefield tapped after you earthbend it. Dryad Arbor, a land card that is also a 1/1 creature. Now, as I mentioned before, the reason this card is included in the deck is because we can go fetch it up with Green Sun Zenith for just 1 green mana from as early as turn 1. A funny little thing about Dryad Arbor is that you can't use it to produce mana on the turn it comes down, because it is actually a creature and it will have summoning sickness. Field of the Dead, a game changer land that I can probably make a 1-hour video about. It's a land that taps for a colorless mana and enters the battlefield tapped. And whenever Field of the Dead or any other land enters the battlefield and you do control 7 differently named lands, you get to generate a 2/2 zombie token. And honestly, it's a good thing they turned Field of the Dead into a game changer, because this is just one of the craziest lands ever printed. It's just a win con on a land really, and you don't even have to do anything for it. You just have to play lands and it will generate you tokens, and at some point they will just take over the game. But especially in this type of landfall deck where we will have like 5 to 10 landfall triggers every single turn, the amount of zombies that Field of the Dead will generate you will be absolutely crazy, and it is one of the best win cons in the entire deck. And if you do manage to earthbend your Field of the Dead, your opponents have no way to ever remove it. They can't exile it, they can't destroy it, and since Field of the Dead relies on us having 7 differently named lands, I also decided to include some snow-covered lands in the deck, because just a regular mountain and a snow-covered mountain actually count as 2 different lands, making it really easy to meet the requirements of this card. Ghost Quarter. You can sacrifice this land to destroy any land on the battlefield. The controller of that land will then get to search their library for a basic land card and put it in the battlefield. Now obviously you can use this land to just destroy any of your opponent's multicolored lands and actually take them off one of their colors and just lock them out of the game. Or you can use this on your own earthbent lands to just destroy them, make them return, and you will get a free basic land in the process. And the most beautiful part is that you can just earthbend this land itself and you will just be able to use it over and over again. Hidden Nursery. For 5 mana and tapping this land, you get to discover 4. Now in itself a pretty solid effect that will get you a free spellcast and a free earthbending trigger, but this thing gets absolutely crazy whenever you do have an untap effect on the battlefield. You can just earthbend this land, use its ability, get a free discover trigger, it will just return to the battlefield, it will be untapped, earthbend it again, sacrifice it again, and you will be able to get a huge amount of value from this. You will be able to just loop this effect over and over again, and you will be able to cast everything in your deck that costs 4 mana or less. Horizon of Progress. For 3 mana and tapping it, you are allowed to put a land card straight from your hand onto the battlefield. A pretty neat way later in the game to get those additional land drops and landfall triggers. And for 1 mana, tapping this and sacrificing it, you get to draw a card. A really solid land to just start earthbending that will enable you to get some sort of repeatable draw engine later in the game. Kavaron, Memorial World. One of the land planet cards we got in the Edge of Eternity set. This land has the station mechanic, meaning on sorcery speed we can tap any creature we control to add charge counters equal to that creature's power onto this land. Whenever we are able to get to 12 plus charge counters, we are able to activate its ability. For 2 mana, tapping this land and sacrificing another land, we get to generate a 2/2 colorless robot token, and all of our creatures will get +1 power and haste until the end of turn. And this ability is really good for a couple of reasons. It gives us an additional sacrifice outlet to sacrifice our lands to, it does act as a token producer, and it does act as a global haste enabler, instantly enabling us to swing with any token we generate in this deck. And usually getting to the 12 charge counters isn't all that hard to do in this deck, because we do play a couple of value engines that we'll never be swinging with, and you can just use those creatures to tap and station this land. Lazotep Quarry. We can tap this land and sacrifice a creature to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, giving us an additional sacrifice outlet for any of our earthbent lands, and for 2 generic mana plus X and sacrificing this land, we get to exile target creature with mana value X from our graveyard, and Lazotep Quarry will generate us a 4/4 zombie token copy of that card, which is an excellent recursion tool to just get any of your valuable creatures back from the graveyard if your opponents did manage to deal with them. You can get an additional use out of your Crater of Behemoth, you can just go fetch your Omnat back to start generating a huge army of tokens, or you can just return your Sylvan Safekeeper to the battlefield to start any of your infinite loops. Shifting Woodland. A card with the Delirium ability, meaning we can only use it if we have 4 or more different card types in our graveyard. Card types being things like land, creature, planeswalker, instant, sorcery. When we do meet the requirement, we can pay 4 mana to make Shifting Woodland turn into a copy of any permanent card in our graveyard. And like I talked about with the previous card, it's just a fantastic card to get additional uses out of any valuable permanents in your graveyard. And this card is also used in some of the infinite combos in this deck. Strip Mine and Wasteland. Both lands will enter the battlefield untapped and tap for a colorless mana, and you can can tap them to destroy any land, or in the case of Wasteland, any non-basic land on the battlefield. And these lands go absolutely crazy with the Earthbending and any untap effect. You can just Earthbend these lands, tap them to destroy any of your opponent's lands, and they will just return to the battlefield. If you then have an Amulet of Vigor, they will enter untapped and you will be able to use them again, destroying even more lands. And these lands also have a really crazy synergy with cards that allow you to play lands from your graveyard like an Icestill Explorer. You can play this land, destroy any of your opponent's lands, replay it from your graveyard because you are allowed to play an additional land thanks to Icestill Explorer, and just reuse it again. Two really cool lands that might actually win you the game by just destroying all lands your opponents control. Talon Gates of Madara. Whenever this land enters the battlefield, target creature phases out, meaning it won't exist until its controller's next upkeep. And you can use this effect both offensively and defensively. You can just use it on your own Toph to just phase her out and opponents won't be able to interact with her anymore until your next turn. If someone is about to combo off, you can just tap your Elvish Reclaimer, sacrifice one of your lands, go fetch up Talon Gates on instant speed, and you will be able to disrupt their entire game plan. And it also has an activated ability for 4 generic mana that will allow you to instantly put this land from your hand onto the battlefield. So this land even has its own ability to make sure you can use it on instant speed to just disrupt anything or protect Toph. Urza's Cave. For 3 mana and sacrificing this land, we get to search our library for any land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. A land card that also functions as a land tutor, allowing us to go fetch up our Field of the Dead, our Strip Mine if we want to start destroying lands, or our Shifting Woodlands if we want to set up a combo. And obviously, if you do manage to Earthbend this land, you won't even lose it in the process and you will be able to use it again on a later turn. Urza's Saga. This is both a land card and an enchantment saga card, meaning whenever it enters the battlefield it will get 1 lore counter, giving it the ability that you can tap it for 1 colorless mana. The second part of the saga really isn't all that important in this deck, but it does give you the option to invest 2 mana, tap this land, and you will get to generate a Golem Construct token. And whenever this land gets to the third part of its saga, you will get to search your library for any artifact card that costs 0 or 1 mana and you get to put it straight onto the battlefield. After that resolves, you will have to sacrifice this land. And we actually do play some really relevant targets for this effect. You can use it to go fetch up your Skull Clamp and just draw you an insane amount of cards. You can use it to go fetch up your Soul Ring, accelerating your mana, or you can even go fetch up your Amulet of Vigor, making everything enter untapped and actually enabling some of the combos we play in this deck. And Urza's Saga gets absolutely crazy with Earthbending, because if you do manage to Earthbend this land before it gets to the last part of its saga, when it then does and you do have to sacrifice it, it will just re-enter again with 1 lore counter and it will start ticking through all of its abilities once again, enabling you to get even more value from it. Vesuva. This land will enter as a copy of any land that's already on the battlefield. You can use it to copy any of your color producing lands if you do really need the colors. You can use it to copy your Field of the Dead and get double the amount of zombies, or you can do some funny shenanigans with Strip Mine and Wasteland. There's one interaction I do want to point out about Vesuva, and that is that it doesn't really work with Scapeshift and Field of the Dead. Let's say for example you sacrifice 7 lands to a Scapeshift and you do decide to go tutor up 5 lands, a Field of the Dead and Vesuva. Since all of the lands enter at exactly the same time, Vesuva won't actually see Field of the Dead being on the battlefield and you won't be able to copy it that way. So please don't make this mistake in any of your games. And obviously we also play 5 of the Fetchlands in this deck, because as I mentioned, these are absolutely insane when you combine them with Earthbending, and they will accelerate your mana by a huge amount and they will allow you to filter and thin out your deck. And for the regular mana producing lands in this deck, we play Cinderglade, a Commercial District, a Highland Forest, a Shelter Ticket, a Stomping Ground, a Yavimaya, and for basics we play 3 snow-covered forests, 2 snow-covered mountains, 2 regular forests, and 1 regular mountain. And to wrap things up, let's talk about the combos we play in the deck. Before we jump in, quick reminder that I also wrote a detailed primer on Moxfield that fully explains every combo in detail. I will be going over all the combo lines in this video and showing them visually, but if you really want to get a true understanding, I would really highly recommend going through the Moxfield primer. Everything is explained step by step and you can just read through it at your own pace. For the first combo, you will need 3 things. You will need Ashaya on the battlefield, a Sylvan Safekeeper on the battlefield, and a Badger Mole Cup in your hand. You start this combo off by playing the Badger Mole Cup from your hand. Because of Ashaya, Badger Mole Cup will be a forest land in addition to its other types. Badger Mole Cup will then enter the battlefield and it will allow you to Earthbend 1. And since it is a forest, you will use its ability to Earthbend itself. Then you activate Sylvan Safekeeper's ability to sacrifice your own Badger Mole Cup. Badger Mole Cup will then die and it will return to the battlefield tapped because you actually Earthbend it. Badger Mole Cup's ability will then trigger and you will use it to Earthbend itself again. Then you can just keep sacrificing and returning it over and over again, and this combo will result in you getting infinite landfall triggers. And there's also an additional thing you can add to this combo, and it is using one of the untappers we play in this deck. Either an Amulet of Vigor, a Spelunking, or a Horizon Explorer. Because now whenever you go through the loop, your Badger Mole Cup will actually enter the battlefield untapped. Thanks to the Earthbending, it will have haste, and due to it being a forest, you will be able to tap it for 2 green mana, and this combo will not only give you infinite landfall triggers then, but it will also generate you infinite green mana in the process. For the second combo, you will need 3 things. You will need a Springheart Nantuko in your hand, either a Tireless Provisioner, a Lotus Cobra, or a Nissa on the battlefield, and you will also need an animated land, be it an Earthbend land or a Dryad Arbor. You start this combo off by casting Springheart Nantuko for its bestow cost and actually bestowing it on one of your animated lands. Then you have to get a single landfall trigger by just playing a land from your hand, and whenever the land then enters, you will get 2 triggers. You will get a trigger on the mana producing creature and a Springheart Nantuko trigger. First you have to resolve the mana trigger, adding 1 mana to your mana pool, and then you can resolve the Springheart Nantuko trigger. You will tap the land you just played for 1 mana and you will have a total of 2 mana in your mana pool, which is enough to pay for Nantuko's ability. You will then create a land token copy of whatever land he is attached to, and you will once again get 2 more triggers, 1 of your mana producer and 1 of Nantuko. You will then be able to just tap the land token that Nantuko just produced you, and you will be able to pay for the copy ability again, giving you another land, another mana, another Nantuko trigger, and you can just repeat the process from there. And this combo will result in you getting infinite landfall triggers and infinite tapped land tokens. For the next combo line, you will need a couple of things. You need a Shifting Woodland on the battlefield, an Aftermath Analyst in your graveyard, 1 out of the 3 mana producing creatures on landfall on the battlefield, or any of the 3 effects that allow your lands to enter the battlefield untapped, a Sylvan Safekeeper on the battlefield, and you will need at least 8 mana producing lands under your control. You start this combo off by tapping all 8 of your lands and floating 8 mana. Then you activate your Sylvan Safekeeper, sacrificing all of your lands but the Shifting Woodland. Then you activate Shifting Woodland's ability for 4 mana, turning it into a copy of Aftermath Analyst. Then you use the other 4 mana to pay for the activated ability of the copied Aftermath Analyst and sacrificing the Shifting Woodland. The ability will then resolve and you will get to return all lands, including the Shifting Woodland, from your graveyard to the battlefield. When those lands then re-enter the battlefield, you will be able to either generate 8 mana by any of the mana producers, or all of the lands will enter untapped by any of the untap effects, and you will be able to tap them again to generate you 8 mana to pay for the combo. Then you will just be able to keep repeating the combo, which will give you infinite landfall triggers, it will give you infinite colored mana whenever you control more than 8 lands, and whenever you use a Tireless Provisioner for the combo, you will also get to generate infinite food tokens and use your infinite mana to gain infinite life. And for the last combo in this deck, you will need 3 things. You need Ashaya on the battlefield, Titania on the battlefield, and a Vesuva in your hand. You start this combo off by playing Vesuva from your hand and making it enter as a copy of Titania, which is totally possible because Titania will be a forest thanks to Ashaya. Then you will have to put Vesuva into your graveyard because you now control 2 copies of Titania and the legend rule does apply. Then both the first and second abilities of Titania will trigger off your Vesuva copy, and the second ability of your original Titania will also trigger. You then decide to resolve the second Vesuva and the original Titania trigger, creating you 2 5/3 elemental tokens, and then you resolve the first Vesuva trigger that is a copy of Titania's first ability, and you are able to return Vesuva instantly from your graveyard to the battlefield, which will enable you to start a loop over again, and it will generate you an infinite amount of 5/3 elemental tokens and an infinite amount of landfall triggers. And that's it for my take on Toph Toph Hardheaded Teacher. Easily one of the most complex decks I've ever built for the channel, but also one of the most unique. Earthbending really does change how lands function in a game of Commander, and Toph really pushes that ability to its limit, turning your entire mana base into a looping value engine instead of something that you're afraid to lose. This deck also makes for the 4th Avatar Commander in a row that I have covered for the channel, and it will probably be the last. I really wanted to explore all the legendary creatures in this set properly, because I genuinely think most of the mechanics in this set are really unique and really interesting, and I just like them a lot. But after this video, I will be shifting my focus back onto some older commanders that have been on my to-do list for way too long. If you made it this far in the video, comment a rock emoji down below so I know you watched the entire thing. Share this video with all of your friends and your entire family. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss next week's upload. As always, thanks for watching, good luck with the earthbending, and I will see you in the next one.